You think they're fine. Everyone does. They look composed, self-sufficient, completely unbothered by the things that seem to unravel everyone else around them. And that image is so convincing that almost nobody stops to ask what it's actually costing them. But here's what nobody tells you. The very system that makes a dismissive avoidant look the strongest is the exact same system that, with every passing year, is quietly working against them. And by the time the damage becomes visible, decades have already gone. Research from adult attachment studies confirms something that completely reframes the way you see this. Dismissive avoidants don't become more at peace as they get older. The system they build to suppress their emotions becomes more expensive to run with time. The walls don't get lighter. They get heavier. And most people, including the avoidant themselves, never connect the growing emptiness, the flatness, the slow creeping sense that something important is missing, to the emotional patterns they constructed in childhood and never once stop to examine. I see this with my clients all the time. Someone sits across from me, successful, calm, completely put together on the outside, and says, "I just don't feel much anymore." And I have to stop them right there, because what they're describing isn't peace. It's not emotional maturity. It's the long-term cost of a system that was built to help them survive, but was never designed to actually let them live. So let's slow all the way down and understand what's actually happening inside a dismissive avoidant before the consequences even become visible on the surface. Because this is where everything starts. A dismissive avoidant's entire emotional system was built on one rule: need nothing from anyone, and nothing can ever be taken from you. This wasn't something they chose consciously. It was something their nervous system learned very early, most likely in childhood, when showing emotional needs was consistently met with dismissal, discomfort, or complete silence. So their brain adapted. It learned to convert vulnerability into competence. It learned to replace emotional connection with achievement, with productivity, with the clean and controlled feeling of not needing anyone at all. And for years, sometimes decades, that system holds. Careers grow. Solitude feels like a personal preference. The absence of deep relationships reads as freedom rather than loss. And then time keeps moving. The achievements stop feeling like enough. The solitude that once felt chosen starts to feel like the only available option. And somewhere in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, something rises to the surface that their entire system has no real answer for. Not a problem they can fix. Not a goal they can pursue. Just a slow and quiet recognition that the life they so carefully built was designed to protect them from loss. And in doing exactly that, it kept them from ever fully having anything worth losing in the first place. And this is where the pace picks up, because what happens next is specific. It is measurable, and most dismissive avoidants never see it coming. The first thing that happens is their emotional range quietly and steadily shrinks. This isn't their usual self-containment. This is something flatter, something more permanent. There is less access to joy that doesn't come directly from being productive or useful. Less ability to be emotionally present, even in the rare moments when they actually want to be. If you ask how they are, they say fine. And they genuinely mean it, because they can no longer locate anything beneath the surface worth reporting. Decades of pushing emotions down doesn't just suppress feelings temporarily. It gradually cuts off access to them entirely. Research on emotional suppression is very clear on this. People who consistently avoid processing their emotions don't just feel less of the painful things. They start feeling less of everything. The calm, the dismissive avoidant was so proud of stops being a skill. It becomes an absence. And absence and peace are not the same thing, even though from the outside they can look identical. The second thing that happens is their relationships begin to reflect the emotional investment they never made. Friendships that were never allowed to go past the surface level slowly fade out, and there is no real foundation to rebuild them on. Romantic relationships that were kept at a comfortable emotional distance either ended long ago or settled into something functional but completely hollow. And now, in the later chapters of life, when most people naturally lean on connections they spent years carefully building, the dismissive avoidant looks around and finds very little actually there. Research on aging and social connection is direct about this. The depth of a person's relationships in midlife and beyond is one of the strongest predictors of both mental and physical health outcomes. Chronic emotional isolation is linked to faster cognitive decline, a measurably weakened immune system, and significantly shorter life expectancy. The independence that felt like protection for so many years turns out to have a very concrete and very serious price attached to it. The third thing that happens is the one that almost nobody sees coming, and it is the most psychologically significant of all. The dismissive avoidant begins to feel regret, but they have almost no internal framework to process it. Most people, when regret surfaces, can trace it back to a specific moment, talk about it with someone they trust, sit with it, and eventually work it into their understanding of themselves. The dismissive avoidant cannot do that easily. Their entire system was specifically built to avoid sitting with difficult and uncomfortable emotions, so the regret doesn't get processed. It accumulates instead. It shows up as irritability that has no clear source, as a quiet, unexplained bitterness that colors the way they see things, as a habit of minimizing other people's close relationships, because witnessing genuine intimacy has started to produce a discomfort they cannot name and do not understand. They don't connect any of this back to a lifetime of emotional avoidance. They don't have the internal language for that connection, so they explain it away. They tell themselves other people are simply too emotional, that they just prefer their own company, that this is who they are and who they have always been. But underneath that story, something very different is happening. Their nervous system, which spent an entire lifetime running from attachment, is now quietly running an audit on everything that strategy cost them, and the results are not easy to sit with. Now here's the hardest truth in all of this. This is the moment everything in this video has been building toward, and it is the one most people are completely unprepared for. A dismissive avoidant moving through these patterns will almost never name what is happening to them, not because they are deliberately hiding it, not because they can't sense something shifting on some level, but because naming it out loud would mean admitting that the entire system they built their identity around came at a cost they never consciously agreed to pay. It would mean admitting that the self-sufficiency wasn't purely a preference. It was a defense. It would mean admitting that the relationships they held at arm's length for decades actually mattered to them, and that keeping those relationships at that distance wasn't really a free choice. It was a loss they kept choosing without fully understanding what they were giving up. That kind of honesty requires a level of emotional access that their system spent an entire lifetime making nearly impossible to reach. So instead of naming it, they show it, in the way they observe other people's deep relationships with an expression that reads as indifference but lingers just a moment too long, in the way they push even harder into work or structure or routine the moment the stillness starts to feel threatening, in the way they sometimes say something unexpectedly raw and then immediately cover with a subject change or a deflecting comment, as though the moment never happened at all. These are not random behaviors. They are a system under serious strain. They are the signs of someone whose defenses are still operating, but whose emotional reality has slowly, quietly grown larger than those defenses can contain. And this is the brutal psychological reality that the title of this video is actually pointing to. Not that dismissive avoidants are broken, not that they are incapable of feeling, but that the strategy they built to protect themselves from pain works so completely for so long that by the time the cost becomes undeniable, a significant portion of life they could have had is already passed. Understanding all of this does not mean a dismissive avoidant is beyond reach. It does not mean that change is impossible, because it genuinely is, even much later in life. The nervous system retains far more flexibility than most people assume, and real emotional growth can happen at almost any age when the right conditions and the right support are present. But what it does mean is that the cost of never examining this pattern is not abstract or theoretical. It is concrete. It shows up in the body. It shows up in the quality of relationships. It shows up in the quiet moments when the noise stops and there is nothing there to fill the space. And it compounds with every year that passes without being looked at directly. The person who spent a lifetime looking like they needed nothing didn't start out that way. They learned it. They learned it in a specific environment, at a specific age, for very specific and understandable reasons. And what was learned, even very early and very deeply, can be unlearned. Not easily, not quickly, but genuinely, if the person finds enough safety and enough reason to try. Sometimes the one who looks the most put together is carrying the longest running wound, And what looks like someone who simply never needed anyone is actually someone who decided, before they were old enough to know what they were deciding, that needing people was a risk they could not afford to take. Now I want to hear from you. Have you watched someone in your life, or maybe even recognized yourself in this, and seen this pattern playing out across the years? Drop it in the comments. What you share might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if this gave you something real, something that actually shifted the way you see this, subscribe. Because next week we're going into what finally pushes a dismissive avoidant to stop running and face their patterns, and what that turning point genuinely looks like from the inside. That is a video you will not want to miss.